What are the warning signs that someone should leave their organization immediately?
Gentlemen in blue FBI windbreakers coming into your office would be the first warning sign that you should leave your organization immediately. Black SUVs pulled up in front of the corporate campus, marched in, stood in front of everybody's computers and said, everybody step out.
I don't want to walk into that. I don't want to walk into that office. I don't want to see anybody. And I'd never experienced that feeling before. It just hit me like a truck. And I started asking a question, which is, can you tell me something specific that you did yesterday? And the majority of people that I spoke to that were in those types of roles could not remember a single thing they had done the previous day.
The business world is so fast-paced now, so complex now, so ambiguous now. How do we find out if somebody's a good fit for the job? We hire them. And that there is a culture. There is something happening under the surface. Every meeting that you attend, you attend a meeting with 12 people. Including yourself, there are 13 meetings happening at the same time.
You take that human that is me and get me up at 5 o'clock in the morning. You create somebody who's up at 5 o'clock in the morning, but you also create somebody who is chronically tired. So I made one change, and that one change was to shift from the gym that was closed at 9 o'clock at night to a gym that is open 24 hours. Now I work out 5 days a week. Changed nothing else about at that gym 5 days a week. Changed nothing else except for going to something that was open at the time at which I wanted to do the thing that I was going to do. Hello, everybody. Welcome to what is actually going to be a slightly different version of the Humanity Working podcast today. I am joined by Dan Rust. Hey, Dan.
Hello there. Hey, Paul.
And Dan is the host of, I guess you could call it a sister podcast, because we're very much in the same
Let's call
domain.
it that. Yes.
Yeah. Even though neither of us are female, we'll call it a sister podcast, and it's called Leadership Disrupted. And what we found out, Dan and I just met formally for the first time about half an hour ago, and we found out that we've sort of been stalking each other for a while. Dan's been listening to this podcast. I've been listening to his stuff and watching his stuff as well. And also I've read his book, Workplace Poker. Really, really interesting book. And there's some themes and topics from it that we'll get into, I think, in our discussion today. Dan's also got a new book coming out soon, called Leadership Disrupted.
Conveniently called Leadership Disrupted, yes.
Good co-branding there. Love it. That, and is the VP of Global Leadership Development for Info Pro Learning. So first off, a formal welcome, Dan.
Hey, it is great to be welcomed, Paul. It is. We've already had a great 30-minute conversation, and hoping that will just continue for the next 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, and I said we're going to do things a little differently, and so I was just having a thought about how we can have a really meaningful discussion today, and what I decided to do was to break it down into a set of questions where both Dan and I can give our point of view on this topic. Because having, as I say, stalked Dan and followed Dan for a while, there's a lot we agree on, but I think there's some areas where potentially we creatively disagree as well. So hopefully that will lead to some really interesting discussion about our relative approaches to all of this. So I've got 8 questions, Dan. I've forwarded those questions for you, so you should have a copy of them.
I do have them. Yes.
Good, excellent. And so we'll just go. We'll do kind of do like a back and forth. So I'm going to ask the first one, and then we'll both give an answer to it. You'll ask the second one. You ready for this game, Dan?
So this is kind of like a Letterman top 10 list, only
in a sense
different. Yes.
Yeah. Not 10, not 8. Actually, the new Spinal Tap is just about to come out, so we should probably have done 11. But we're doing 8. And I think I was inspired to do this by virtue of the fact that your book is named after a game, poker. So this is Probably a less entertaining game than poker, but hopefully a more enlightening one.
We'll try. We'll try to make it entertaining.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we've got our first question, and the brains. Oh, I should by the way add that these questions are kind of mine, and of course, kind of AI driven. So Claude had a little bit of help in asking these questions, but I think they're actually relatively good.
They're good. Yes.
So yeah, absolutely. So well done, Claude, the third contributor to this podcast today. So this first question that it came up with an I tweet is, what are the warning signs that someone should leave their organization immediately? Over to you, Dan.
So I guess this will tell you something about me. Because I read that question, the first thing that came to mind was, well, gentlemen in blue FBI windbreakers coming into your office would be the first warning sign that you should leave your organization immediately. Now, and I can't say that I have experienced exactly that, but I have experienced the aftermath. I've been hired into an organization with the intent of doing a renewal because the entire senior leadership team was eviscerated when black SUVs pulled up in front of the corporate campus, marched in, stood in front of everybody's computers and said, everybody step out. And this is a multi-million-dollar organization, large business. And ultimately, they all went away. And then 3 months later, somebody's hiring Dan Rust to head up learning and development. But in any event, on a more serious note, in terms of warning signs that someone should leave their organization immediately. So I will say this, first of all, I'm a literal person. So when I read immediately, I think immediately. Yeah. I think in most cases, the reality is, unless you are in some kind of danger, you probably don't leave immediately. You probably begin planning immediately. So I would say, what are the warning signs that someone should start their mental plan to get out, start looking, start exploring, start preparing the landscape for a transition out? And in most cases, that comes from a circumstance where there's a complete misalignment of values, where you just can't feel good about going into work every day. If you find yourself consistently waking up and dreading that entry into the workplace, either because there are people there that you don't like for whatever reason, or because of the mission or the business practices of the organization, if there's something where you just can't feel good about the work that you're doing every day and that it's in alignment with who you want to be as a human, then begin planning and begin laying the foundation and go find. And this is the hardest lesson for me to learn. Honestly, I grew up as my family background. I grew up as a family of farmers, ranchers, and coal miners. Very blue collar, never much money, and so I didn't even realize it. But I took that with me into my adult life. So I was always having anxiety about money, about paychecks, and so I stayed way too long in more than a small number of places because I didn't want to risk the money. I didn't have the faith that if I just left, I could replace that. Now, luckily, that has changed in the last 10, 15 years. But in my early days, I stuck it out. I tried to make it work. And if I had any lesson that I wish I could give to my younger self, my lesson would be listen to your instinct. And if you just don't feel good about yourself and the work that you're doing because of that kind of misalignment, actively begin laying the groundwork to go find something else, because there is something else for every one of us. There is a place for any of us to go and work and have a decent living and make a contribution and feel good about the work that we're doing every day. If that makes sense. How does that sound to you, Paul?
It does make sense. And I guess I got a follow-up before I give my answer,
Sure.
which is that as you were talking about the idea of sticking at a place for longer than you wanted to, or you should have done, or you anticipated, it sounds like that's closely related to your and many people's attitude towards risk. So, have you found that over time your attitude towards risk has shifted?
Um, I know it should have. So I know what the right answer is, and the right answer would be yes. Over time, I've evolved to be more comfortable taking smart risks. But I know me. I am a risk averse person. I just am. I have kind of an engineer's mind. I'm mildly autistic. I just don't. I don't like to take risks, and
Mm-hmm.
so my version of a healthy risk taking would be doing proactive planning and preparing and laying the groundwork for a less risky transition. So what I have tended to do in the past, again, I'm saying this is a don't example, is
Yeah.
wait until the change is thrust upon me. Then when the change is thrust upon me and I don't have a choice, then I scramble and do
Yeah.
the things that I need to do to get a new job. Today, if I was guiding somebody, if I was coaching somebody, I would say, don't ignore those warning signs and begin the hard work, begin doing the groundwork. And there's a whole series of things that you can do when when you're working in a role that you know you're eventually going to be leaving. If you can have control over the projects that you take on, over the work that you end up doing, do the work, invest in the work that's going to serve you forward. Take on those projects. In some cases, those are the projects that are harder and riskier and that other people don't want. Go to your boss and say, I'll take on that big, juicy, uncertain project because what you're doing is you're going to do your best work on that project, but you're also going to have that. You're going to have that success as part of your story going forward. And or whatever else, what other decisions you make internally in that workplace, make those decisions with that strategy in mind. This will help me position, or will this help me position myself going forward? And then, as you begin to do the work of promoting yourself and reaching out and having interviews, doing all of that proactively, it's just easier to be a strong interviewee
Mm.
when you have a job, even if it's a job you hate. When you have a job, you're just in a better position to be, I think, more authentic and ultimately give a stronger interview.
Okay. So I guess my answer to the question, which as a reminder is what are the warning signs that someone should leave their organization immediately? I think my answer to the question would be twofold, and a bit like you, I'm a little bit literal on this. When I'm interpreting it as immediate, like
Mm-hmm.
that hour, that day. The first one would be, I would say, if you get a whiff of Enron vibes, you get a whiff of that of the um, there may be danger
Mm-hmm.
associated with me staying or associated with me remaining associated with this organization, and or if, which is the second one is very close, if the company completely conflicts with your ethics, and I mean that specifically, as
Yeah.
in you feel like going to work is the idea of you going to work that day is helping something move forward that yours is completely and utterly opposed to your worldview, then that's probably a warning sign. And then the second one that I wouldn't discount, and I wouldn't discount it because I've had it once in my life, is there are occasionally examples. This might happen once or twice in your life. It happened literally once
Mm-hmm.
in mine, whereby everything seems fine, and then suddenly you hit a wall. Um, this is really interesting for me. I was involved in learning and development at the start of my career, and and I'm back in learning and development today. So it's not that I hate learning and development in any way, shape, or form, but I was training I was doing a lot of IT training for people, learning courses, delivering courses, learning the next course, delivering the next course. And I was walking through one of these tiny parks that you see in London that are like in between like two streets, and
Mm-hmm.
they're sort of the size of a square. Beautiful. It's a beautiful day. Everything about the morning was lovely. And as I was walking into the office, it was like out of nowhere, I got hit by a truck going, I do not want to do this ever. I don't want to walk into that. I don't want to walk into that office. I don't want to see anybody. And I'd never experienced that feeling before. It just hit me like a truck. And later that day, I handed in my notice. And I didn't know what I was going to. I didn't know even why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. But it was as big, it was as powerful and as strong as though
Mm-hmm.
I'd had a heart attack or something along those lines. It was just like a feeling that was absolutely impossible for me to shake. Looking back on that, I can now see that I was having symptoms of sort of low level burnout that I was disregarding, and then suddenly it hit me like a health event, I suppose. And it took me probably 2 or 3 months to fully kind of recover my work mojo. But I think the best decision that I made in that period was actually acting upon it. So it's a slightly confusing answer, really, but it's just that like if your subconscious enters into your conscious and screams at you that you shouldn't be doing this anymore, that's probably a time when you should at least think about acting upon it.
Absolutely. And I'm tracking with you. And if I were to summarize all of this, I would just say, don't ignore that voice. Don't ignore that
Mm.
voice that's telling you, I think he just lied. Or that voice
Mm-hmm.
that's telling you, I don't think that's the real story under the story. Or that voice that's
Oh
telling
yes.
you, this is icky.
Mm-hmm.
That you may never know the full story, but don't ignore that voice, and at least begin planning, begin thinking, begin taking care of yourself, um, because there, in the world of business, the world of capitalism, the world of Darwinian survival of the fittest in the world of business, it is at its best, it's a collaborative, creative, innovative experience. But at its worst, it's incredibly competitive and challenging, and just don't turn that inner voice off. So I think you and I can definitely agree on that.
Yeah. All right. You've got one for me, I think.
All right, now the next question. So I want to get this exactly right. When you see someone struggling at work, what is usually the root cause? Um, Whether it's for individuals or for leaders, do you tend to find some common root causes when people are struggling at work?
Yeah. We we see this quite a lot, actually, because in our day job, my day job, I do really kind of two things, which is one centered around programming for people that are to help them thrive at the workplace, either as individuals or as leaders. And as part of that programming, there's an experiential component where people are figuring out how the materials apply for them and in their lives. But then the second aspect of what we do is coaching and mentoring of people in these situations. And so we come across a lot of people who
Mm-hmm.
are in some way struggling at work. Those tend to be the people that reach out to us. Um, and I will say, and this will be a theme in terms of some of my answers, that there is a lot of uniqueness, but there are also a lot of themes, right? And the themes are really interesting, and I think the themes have actually shifted a little bit over the course of the last, say, 5 to 6 years. I'll start with the individual. For me, the thing that I encounter the most with individuals is that um, there is a feeling of overwhelm that is much more prevalent now than there was say a decade ago. And the overwhelm is very interesting in its own right. If you go back, let's say 20 years, we used to have job descriptions that were pretty robust and tended to relate to the activities that people would perform on a day-to-day basis. And in general, for the majority of employees, the expectation was that you would show up at a particular time, you would leave at a particular time, and you would do a fairly structured set of activities. And if you accomplished that structured set of activities and did enough of it, then you were a good worker. And if you did not, then you were not a good worker. And that formed the basis of discussions between managers and employees. And also, because there was some structure and some specifics associated with that, that allowed employees to have a confidence that they were doing a good job on a day-to-day basis. They could see what they were being measured on, and they could see the stuff that they were being measured on. And somehow, as we've shifted to environments that are much more flexible, and we've created organizations that are much more adaptable, which is great, and we've created work which is much more flexible in nature. As we've done that, for many people, a lot of the time, that work itself has become highly unstructured and highly ambiguous in nature, to the point where many people do not have an understanding of what good looks like. And there is always more work than there is time to do it, right? The never-ending to-do list is what we call it in one of our programs. And so you're dealing with this idea of as far as you can look, there's more to do than there is time to do it. You've got to figure out somehow which of those things you are actually going to do. You got to work your way through it, and you got to kind of figure out, are you good at it or are you not good at it? Have you done a good job? Have you not done a good job? Because in many cases, your managers or your leaders aren't even going to know what you're doing. So even if they can't necessarily provide the guidance associated with that. So that unstructured, ambiguous nature, the never-ending to-do list, that all comes together in feelings of, a low-level struggle, low-level burnout. And we find that's sort of thematically true. When we started Billion Minds, we did well over 100 interviews, and we found that theme was kind of like working its way through everybody. I don't know what good looks like. I don't know if I'm being successful. And it really hit its, the thing that hit home most for me when we were doing our research on this originally was when I started asking a question, which is, can you tell me something specific that you did yesterday? And the majority of people that I spoke to that were in those types of roles could not remember a single thing they had done the previous day.
Wow.
So in other words, it was sort of like work was flowing through them. and because they didn't journal, because they didn't do these various other sort of reflective activities, it was flowing through them. And the only thing they know is that they were tired at the end of it and they don't know what they did. So that's at the individual level. I think at the leader level.
Can I reply to that?
Please. Yeah.
So
go for it.
At exactly the same time that all those things are happening, that manager or leader who's prompting the hiring and is working usually with human resources, they're going through the exact same thing. They're feeling the exact same overwhelm. And so they end up creating job descriptions that are the minimum viable level for HR. So HR and recruiting goes out and gathers up candidates, but all they have in front of them is this bare framework that they've been provided by an overwhelmed manager. Then HR does the first round of interviews. HR ends up with, let's just say, 3 or 4 candidates. This overwhelmed manager is most likely not going to interview 3 or 4 candidates and say, well, I'm going to reject all of them because none of them have the deep skill base or the right skill base based on my deep knowledge of the position. And instead, this overwhelmed manager goes, well, I guess I have to pick the best of the 4. So
Mm.
recruiting is broken. You end up hiring a lot of people who are not matched for the position, either because we don't actually know really deeply what that position is or what it requires, or if somebody does know, that doesn't make it to recruiting. And also on the employee side, employees who want the job, who need the job, they're selling themselves. So they may not be very discerning to be able to assess and analyze, oh, I'm actually not a good fit for this. Because if the job
Mm.
description isn't good for the company, it's also not good for the prospective employee. And so I think we do end up with a lot of mismatches unintentionally. The business world is so fast paced now, so complex now, so ambiguous now. How do we find out if somebody's a good fit for the job? We hire them. And then
Yeah.
we experience them for 3 months or 6 months. After 3 months, we probably recognize, oh, this is a good fit or it's not a good fit. What do we do if we recognize that it's not a good fit? Generally, nothing. We
Yeah.
we might give them some guidance a little bit. We might give them a performance review, some challenging feedback. We might. A lot of
Yeah.
times we don't. And so you end
Yeah.
up, or actually, what do we actually do? We work around them. I hired you to do
Mm.
these things. Oh, you're not really good at this subset of these things. I'm going to work around that. I'm going to find other people or other ways to do those things. And you end up with these traffic jams of accountabilities and people. And then we're adding more and more accountability. It's amazing we get anything done sometimes, as complicated as we've made this world of hiring.
Yeah. Absolutely agree. One thing I'll add on the leadership side, um, I think the challenges of leadership generally have their roots from the day somebody moves into leadership or the day before they moved into leadership. And we have a leadership program that we run. And the single biggest change that I'm happiest with about our leadership program, when we have a strategic relationship with a company now, we used to run our leadership programming for leaders starting as soon as they got into the role. Now we run our leadership
Mm-hmm.
program with our leaders starting 3 to 6 months before they go into that leadership role. Leadership has changed so much in terms of what is effective leadership is so different in a world where the world of work is highly distributed. In some
Mm-hmm.
cases, you don't even you never even met some of the employees that you're leading on a day to day basis, and you have to shift between this physical world and this virtual world, and you've got different employees with different states, in terms of their relationship with you. Maybe you've got one who sits just down the corridor from you, and you've got one that is 1,000 miles away, and somehow you have to figure out how to use all of their strengths equally and things like that. It is a very, very difficult job. Most leaders are set in leadership practices that go back a long that go back a long time and no longer work
Yep.
in this current world of work. And so for leaders, it's sort of like many of them are studious and they look to leadership books and so on to try to figure out how to do it. But the training they're receiving, if they're getting any, in many cases they're not. You take people who are good individual contributors and turn them into leaders that they're completely unsuited for the role. But even in cases where they are relatively well suited, they're not necessarily getting great training. And I know in your organization, you had to revamp a lot of the leadership training for your company, right?
We have these conversations with leaders every day, trying to identify the root causes. Um, and I had a conversation. Oh, this goes back a couple of months, but I had a leader, and he said, and he'd been in the workplace for 35, 40 years. He was on the back end, the last decade of his work life. And he said, I've been doing this for a long time and I've never felt so overwhelmed. And he said, I can't put my finger on any one thing. It's just that there's so much. He said, I know I need to be better at it. And he listed off 5, 6, 7 things, most of which had to do with, I need to know better what my people are doing. I need
Mm.
to know how they're doing it. I need to be a little more conscious regarding who's doing a great job and who's not, and be more of a coach. I need to be willing to step in and coach people. And he went on and on. And I just felt for the guy because he's lived this shift in what we need from leaders. And if I were to summarize it, we need leaders who will go deeper and they will go wider, which makes it harder. We need leaders who will work hard, and I don't think that's happening. Not never. Of course, you have some leaders who are doing fantastic jobs because they're working it. They are treating leadership almost as a sacred obligation, and they're doing great jobs. But I think that's more the exception rather than the rule these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd encourage listeners of our podcast to go back to the recent interview that I did with Gary Ridge, who I think really is a deep thinker about this stuff and has written the book "Any Dumbass Can Do It." And Gary talks a lot about those specific things, and we'll include a link to that episode in the show notes for this one. All right, so I'll keep us going here. My question for you, Dan: how do you recognize which workplace cultures can be navigated versus which ones are fundamentally toxic? And this is where I'm going to plug your old book again, the Workplace Poker book. I have to tell you, I found fascinating, Dan, your categorization of almost like extreme cultures. I think you refer to it as, but that to me was utterly fascinating. I recognized across my all too long career times where I'd been in those varying different cultures, and particularly in large organizations, you can see almost like microcultures when those large organizations. So you might be in one group in a company, and then you shift to another group in the company. It's got a completely different culture. Really interesting stuff. So if folks want to go back and read Dan's book, that section of that book is really interesting regarding this topic.
And it's all based on reality and lived experience. And let me just give you a bit of the backstory to answer your question, because the question is specifically which cultures can be navigated versus the ones that are just fundamentally toxic. So I think I mentioned just a moment ago that I guess I would call myself borderline autistic. I've never been a good reader of people. And it's created challenges for years. And because I did reach a point where I recognized there's a story under the story. There's so many work situations where I was playing the game on the surface. I thought if I worked hard enough, I thought if I did a good job, I thought if I did the right things, it would all work out. Sometimes it did. A lot of times it didn't. And most of the time it was because I wasn't playing the game under the surface. I'm not saying we all have to play corporate politics. I'm saying you have to at least recognize that there is a culture. There is something happening under the surface. Every meeting that you attend, you attend a meeting with 12 people. Including yourself, there are 13 meetings happening at the same time. It's 13 different meetings. Now, I'm not expecting any of us to read all 13 different meetings, but you do have to study the human dynamics that are taking place around you. And so, because it didn't come naturally to me, I had to really work at it, had to develop very specific skills and mindsets to pay attention to those details. And so I've worked in toxic cultures. I've worked in really great, fantastic cultures. Some of those are broad organizational cultures. Some of those are just cultures for a particular work group, a particular cohort of people. And I'll go back to what I said before. Learn to recognize and not dismiss that voice in your head that says, something's not right here, or something is icky here. And listen to that, pay attention. You don't want to, now, can you be too cynical? Possibly. But I would say you're in much more danger of being too Pollyannish, of being too believing. I would say, so in terms of navigating corporate culture, I think my hardest learned lesson is that you're not going to change corporate culture. So you either learn to flow with it like water, You flow with it. You just recognize it. Now, you don't necessarily have to buy into it, but you can learn to flow with it. And then when that culture becomes truly toxic, it's back to the very first question. What's a warning
Yeah.
sign that you should leave immediately? If the people in the organization or the work group with the least amount of power, watch them, listen to them, watch them. If they seem beaten up, tread upon, if the organization or the work group is crushing those with the least power, that's time to move on. Now you may move on immediately, you may move on after 6 months, but it's time to move on. Don't think you're going to fight it. You might be able to temporarily put band-aids on it. And I've made that mistake, thinking, you know what, this leader treats his people like dirt, and because I'm a mid-level manager, I'm going to treat my people better, and I'm going to rise them up. I'm going to give them more opportunities. I'm going to be the band-aid. But you have to recognize that's what you are. You're just a temporary band-aid. The damage is still being created. So if you're in a toxic work environment and you recognize it, transition on. Find a way to move on.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add to that, agree with all of it. The only thing I would add to it is that it's very much a you question, and the you question is going to depend upon where you are at in your career and your life and things like that. So, for example, as I look back, I can see scenarios where I was in a toxic workplace and I stayed too long for some of the reasons that you were talking about, like I don't know where my next job's going to come from and all of that kind of stuff. But I can also see scenarios where I stayed for a period of time and it was appropriate to stay for a period of time because of what I was learning from the situation. And I was quite clear-eyed about it. So very early on in my career, I spent a year at a company, and it was only a year at a company. And 2 months in, I knew it was a highly toxic workplace. But the amount of learning that I was doing in that environment, ironically, some of the more toxic workplaces, they're so high pressured, so high paced, so unforgiving that you do end up learning about a bunch of stuff in them. And so what I decided 2 months in is I'm giving it a year and I'm going to learn as much as I can over the course of that year. And then I'm going to take that learning and I'm going to apply it to something else. But as I say, it's very individual and very time driven. I did that in my early 20s. I would not do that as a 50-something-year-old because other things are more important to me at this stage in my career. So I do think it's an evaluation that you have to go through, and it starts, as you rightly point out, by correctly identifying what the culture is that you are in, and then making a clear-headed decision as to what you're going to do about that.
And I totally track with what you're saying and agree with what you're saying. And sometimes just saying to yourself those words, I see the craziness. It's not me, it's them. And I'm staying, but I'm staying for these very conscious reasons. That alone can make it just a little more palatable for you because you recognize why you're staying. And then you recognize when that reason has ended. Once you've extracted out the learning, once you've pulled out from it everything that you can pull out from it, then it is time to move on. Because if you stay too much longer than that, then you simply become an enabler for sure. Now, I believe I have a question for you. We're going
you
to
do, and we're going to have to accelerate ourselves a little bit here, Dan.
Well, I think we knew that there was going to be a danger in this. You take two very like-minded people with different lived experiences, plenty of stories to tell. This is fantastic. So, all right, here's my question for you, Paul. Do you believe in universal success habits, like waking up at 5 a.m. or whatever? Or should advice for success be personalized to the individual?
So this is the heart of what we do, and it is the biggest change that I've had personally in my life. So if you held me, you've got a bunch of books on your wall. There's a bunch of books behind me as well, and you would have seen probably 10 or 15 years ago, I was the impulse buyer of almost every one of these things, like The Secret to This and The Secret to That, or the 5 a.m. Club, or whatever it would happen to be. And when we started my company, we almost found ourselves initially as sort of being like a curator of all of these things, going, okay, well, that bit's really smart. And, this part over here about, from, I don't know, eat that frog is really interesting. And this thing over here from, I don't know, getting things done
Atomic
is just
Habits.
fascinating. Yeah, atomic habits, etc. And we were collecting all these things together. We recorded a bunch of videos associated with it, and we thought, oh, we'll just curate all of those, and we'll get those to people, and then everybody can be super, super, super successful. And then we started talking to real people, and it was amazing the extent to which you could take all of this stuff and attempt to apply it to a whole bunch of people and find crickets. They'd be like, oh, that's interesting. Does it work? Maybe. Can I do it? Well, I haven't done it successfully yet, so I'm probably not going to. And what we've realized over time is that there are 2 or 3 different reasons why that happens, but I'll keep it. But probably the main one, the most interesting one, is that the habit that you form has to match underlying aspects of who you are. So to pick on the 5 a.m. club, right? I chronologically, and we know this because if I go on vacation or something like that, or if I don't set an alarm, chronologically, I'm a relatively extreme night owl. I have by far my most productive times of the day are between about 10 p.m. to about 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. You take that human that is me and get me up at 5 o'clock in the morning. You create somebody who's up at 5 o'clock in the morning, but you also create somebody who is chronically tired, right? And so there are broad principles that work really well for people, but they have to match to a certain extent who the human is in order for the human to be able to adopt those habits. Otherwise, they will be completely unable to adopt them. And I'll give you one specific example of, I think, something that works relatively well and something that doesn't work well. So we've just established I'm a night owl. A universally effective habit is for us for people to get exercise and movement in their life. Right? Everybody should do that. About a year ago, I belonged to a gym that shut at 9 o'clock at night, and they accepted their last client at 8 o'clock at night. And how often did I get to that gym to work out? Maybe, if I was lucky, once every 2 weeks. I identified that the problem here was that not that I didn't want to form the habit of working out. The problem was that my chronotype and the way that my work was structured around that made it very difficult for me to match that. So I made one change, and that one change was to shift from the gym that was closed at 9 o'clock at night to a gym that is open 24 hours. Now I work out 5 days a week. Changed nothing else about at that gym 5 days a week. Changed nothing else except for going to something that was open at the time at which I wanted to do the thing that I was going to do. So it was adapting the environment to who I was as an individual to allow me to have the positive habit that I needed. So individualism is extremely important. And if you do it, it makes it much more likely that people can engage in some of those success habits that we're talking about. Over to you.
I'm still waiting for the interesting conversation where you and I disagree, because
I think it's coming up.
Because well, we'll see. We'll see. But honestly, yes. Now there's probably not a single self-help book that I've read since the 80s that I regret reading. Every single one of them, let's say the majority of them, had at least 2 or 3 bits and pieces that worked for me. But one of the mistakes that I made was thinking, okay, I'm reading this memoir of Steve Jobs, so Steve Jobs is going to be the model for me, or someone else is going to be the model. Back in the 80s, it was the CEO of Intel, Andrew, and I can't remember his last name now. But
Andy Grove.
Andy Grove. And I read a book about Andy Grove, and I thought, oh yes, I'm going to be Andy Grove. And there were bits and pieces that I took from that I actually did apply. But the big lesson is, over the years, it's been bits and pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And I am the expert on me, and you are the
Yes.
expert on you. And when you read a book, scan through it, read through it, absorb it, but know that you're looking for those bits and pieces that work for you and the finding a way from them to work for you. So that's my way of agreeing with you. I think it's absolutely correct. And then also recognize when something's not working. For example, I'll give you something not working. When it comes to exercise, I agree. Every human being should exercise. So I decided to try a strategy. And one of the strategies I tried was having next to my desk on the floor 2 weights, 35-pound
All right.
weights. That 35 pounds gets heavier
It
every
does.
year.
Yeah.
But so the concept was, well, if I have them here, when my Fitbit says get moving, I can stand
Mm-hmm.
up and I can do my thing. Well, that's a great concept. However, oftentimes Fitbit will say, well, get moving, but I'm in the middle of a meeting. I'm in the middle,
Yeah.
like my day is spent on these kinds of calls, these kinds of meetings. So I still have them here, but I don't get much use out of them. And I have to rethink, all right, what is a strategy that does align with like the natural flow of my work life? And so I appreciate you sharing your story, because I'm going to make a note to myself, and I'm just going to rethink, because this is not working. I've
Yeah.
had these here for 6 months. This last time, that's the second time I've actually raised
I was to say, you just did one rep there. So
and
that's
I'm doing it on a podcast as opposed to actually exercising. So,
yeah.
note to self: current strategy not working. Let's try something new.
Absolutely. All
So,
right.
your question.
So this is the one where I think we're going to disagree. So we will see. So what role do you think luck plays in a person's career?
Oh, this will be interesting. I think it's huge. I think it's huge. Now, we can prepare ourselves for those lucky moments. We can prepare ourselves for, oh, you meet somebody who might be a connection, or there's a job opportunity that might be available. And I will say, for example, my current role is the best job I've ever had in my life. Talking to leaders every day about what's happening in their workplace. When the opportunity for this role came along, I was prepared for it. It wasn't that I had done this job specifically before, but I had over time prepared myself for it. So it was like preparation meets opportunity, and voila, magic happens. But it's also true that sometimes luck and what's the opposite of luck? Lack of luck. Bad things
Yeah.
happen. Sometimes
Good luck and bad
you
luck,
do
I
all the
suppose.
right
Yeah.
things and it just doesn't work out, or there's a twist in your life. And sometimes trying too hard to find meaning in the minutia, sometimes you can, sometimes it's just crappy stuff that happens, and we just need to move on. But that's my answer. I would love to hear yours.
Yeah, I was surprised. I thought I was in reading the book and reading Workplace Poker. I'd love to get into the why behind your approach to this chapter. And I was trying to find the exact statement. I was going to be like the tough journalist here. So you said in this, you said in this book at this point.
If you're writing an
you
advice book, if you're writing a career advice book, you have to provide career advice, and it's tough to write a book that's built around the theme of, you know what, it happens. You know what?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's luck. Good luck. So,
but I think the point, and actually that I think you've answered the question, right? And it's a really, really interesting one. So in the book, by the way, for those people that haven't read it yet, Dan talks about strongly and I think very effectively talks about personal accountability, and talks about the fact that whatever is happening to you in the workplace, you often play a role in those things that are happening to you in the workplace, and getting introspective about what that role is really important. You want to add anything to that before we go
Yeah,
on to my thoughts about
and of
this?
course now you're recounting the book that I wrote, and it's been a while, but now I'm
Of course,
remembering.
yeah.
I think the analogy that I use is you can't play the chess game of your life and move your pieces this way, and this way, and then suddenly look at the chessboard and go,
How
"Oh,
did
I
that
don't,
happen?
I don't like the
Yeah,
positioning of these pieces." I mean, you are the
yeah,
person who positioned these pieces, and now you
yeah,
can
yeah,
reposition them as you move forward. So
yeah,
I'm big on personal accountability, but let's be honest, sometimes stuff happens.
yeah, yeah. I I think actually, and this is the one area where we might disagree on degree, right? So one of the most impactful books that I've read over the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years, is a book called Mastering Uncertainty. And we've actually had one of the authors of that, Matt Watkinson, on the podcast, and that's part of why I got turned on to this approach. But basically, if you're listening, I apologize that you're not here to give the the perfect description of your book. But the way that I interpret it is that it basically states that luck plays a far bigger role in our lives than we like to give it credit for. Because after all, right, if we can think about the world as being deterministic, that can be a much more comfortable place to
Yeah.
be. Like if I do X, Y, will happen, all that kind of stuff. And so, but as he points out, in almost everything major that happens to us, there's a small degree or a medium degree or a large degree of luck that is associated with that. Like how, in most cases, there's luck involved in how you met the person that you spend the rest of your life with, for example, right? You might not have been at that party, or you might not have, even these days, you might have swiped left instead of swiping right, or whatever it happened to be, right? And so there is, and so the way that Matt describes it is that a fundamental approach that we should have to life is maximizing our luck surface area. And so you're putting yourself in a position where good things are more likely to happen than bad things, and or a higher percentage of good things are likely to happen. And you're always in a position where you can control that, but you are dealing with something where the landscape in which you are driven is fundamentally about luck. And if you understand that and internalize that and then determine how to navigate that, you can be in a very strong position. So I look back about 5 or 10 years ago, I used to think of the world in a much more deterministic way than I now do. I now think of the world as fundamentally sort of random, and but that there are strategies that you can adopt to be able to navigate your way through that effectively.
Let me give you an example of exact. So I'm completely agreeing everything you just said. So here's a real world example that's happening right now. You and I had planned for about a 45-minute podcast.
Yeah.
And
which is not going to happen.
When I looked at the 8 questions, I thought, yeah, we can do that in 8.
Yeah.
But look at what's happened. So we're about halfway through. But my sense of it is the interplay has been so valuable, so interesting, so compelling that there's no way either you can't have me back or I can't have you back.
Precisely. So we're going to do a
podcast. So
that's exactly what we're going to do.
On the opposite, had we had a flat, dull, boring 45-minute conversation, we would both just be going, "Oh my God, let's just let's get through 6, 7, 8, and let's move on." So this is where preparation and luck has some play, and maybe the analogy is not really holding together well, but in fact, so something happens, good or bad. How you end up reacting to that thing can make a difference. Can it make all the difference? Sometimes, a lot of times not. So what I love about conversations like this is whenever someone like you recommends a book like Mastering Uncertainty. What's Matt's last name?
Watkins.
So
Watkinson.
So one of the habits I have developed is I will immediately, as soon as my next meeting is done, I will download the audiobook from Audible, and then I'll put that on my playlist for my my new exercise routine, which I'm going to be committing to sometime soon. So this has been fantastic, honestly. So we got through
the
first 5. We've still got 6, 7, and 8, but I know, out of respect for both of our times, we've got to wrap it up. But thank you for this. Honestly, thank you for this. And what I love about this is a purely virtual relationship. You and I have never met in the real world. We came across each other through LinkedIn. We became introduced by mutually reading on LinkedIn. And now I feel like I've got a kinship with someone in Tulsa, Oklahoma that I never would have had without this. There's something there. There's something to not ignore when something happens with that. I don't know what the word is. Serendipity. It's not to be ignored.
Or luck.
Luck.
So thank you so much for being with me today, Dan. There will be a part 2. So we don't know exactly when that part 2 is going to be. It'll probably just show up in your the next part of your podcast feed. But Dan and I will get together and we will tackle the last 3 of these questions in our next podcast. But for now, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.